everybody, and welcome to the General Eclectic Podcast with Rod Dreher. I'm your host, Kale Zeldin, and we are coming to you in the aftermath of quite the event last night. I mean, we don't like to date the podcast too much, but Rod, you even posted on this one.
You know, I got to tell you, Kale, that I assure you that I will never make fun of your bald-headed wife. It's just not going to happen.
I'd have to do something serious on national
because
TV.
We're both Southerners, you know.
Right.
Yeah,
honor bound.
Obviously, we're talking about Will Smith slapping Chris Rock at the Oscars for having made a joke about Will Smith's wife, Jada Pinkett, being bald-headed. Well, she has alopecia, an autoimmune disease. And funnily enough, if you look at the video, Will Smith laughed at what Chris Rock said. He made some joke about you're going to be in G.I. Jane too, you know, with the shaved head. But if you look at the clip, I put this on my blog. There's Will Smith laughing. I mean, Jada's not laughing. And I think it took him like a split second to realize, she doesn't think this is funny. He felt honor bound to get up there and slap Chris Rock. You know, it's weird. Normally I don't appreciate violence, but I just felt when I saw that, I'm like, well, of course he did, because his wife is sick. If she just shaved her head because she was a Sinead O'Connor type weirdo, I'd get that. But this woman has a horrible disease, and Chris Rock made fun of it. I just didn't think that was cool.
Yeah. You know, the comedians definitely, ride the edge. I mean, that's what a good comedian does. You know, you ride the edge, and between funny and inappropriate, and perhaps he rode right off that edge. So
the jester has to know when he's gone too far. And I don't know, though. I mean, when I posted about it, I just posted my initial reaction. I said I'm half-heartedly on Will Smith's side because I get it. I'm a Southerner, and we come from a shame honor culture, and what that means is that you just don't let somebody talk about your wife like that. If Jada Smith was in a wheelchair, and he made a wheelchair joke, would people feel differently about it? I don't know.
I know it's sort of this interesting old-fashioned moment, where you're making the jokes about us both being Southerners, but it's kind of a throwback to a kind of chivalric code that's still there somehow. I mean, we have not quite buried it yet. Interesting.
Right. Well, the thing is, a complicating factor too is, as far as I know, the Smiths are in an open marriage. So,
yes.
How much honor does he really have to defend? But nevertheless, his wife was insulted in a way that I thought was simply cruel because she has a disease, and but that's what everybody's talking about. And at least it made the Oscars interesting for the first time in God knows how long.
Yeah, I didn't watch it. I'll be blunt. I used to live anymore. I used to live and die for it. I mean, as I'm sure some people in the audience know, I used to live and work in Hollywood, and I love movies. I love the show. I love all of it. And at a certain point, when I moved away, I still kept up. I would watch it. I would make sure that I watched all the movies that were vying for top billing and the big awards and all of that. I mean, I really did. It was sort of a church on some level, and I just didn't I don't care. I couldn't even tell you one of the 5 movies that were nominated, honestly, which is I think shocking to me, because I used to live for this.
And this shows you how bad off you are. I think now it's 9 movies.
See, it's 9.
No, but that's just it. I used to be a freaking film critic.
I know. And that's how I first knew about you, Ron. I knew you wrote for the Baton Rouge Morning Advocate. You did the movie reviews, and I would read. That's so funny.
I ended my film critic career as a film critic at the New York Post, know, and to be a film critic in New York is to be in the middle of all of it. And now I just, because you know what, the movies just aren't as good as they used to be. They just aren't.
So it's interesting too, on that score, we're dating ourselves, but I think this is relevant because, I really do think Hollywood is dead. Ross Douthat just put something out on Sunday this past week about sort of the death of the theater. and as a
the death of Hollywood.
Right. Sorry. And when I was coming up and I decided that I was going to be that kind of guy who liked movies, and I started doing the deep dives into the cinematic history, I could not wait to see what was coming out. We didn't have the internet, so all I had was your articles on. I think they would come out on Friday. And what was that section? What was the name of that?
Fun section.
The fun section, because it was fun, and I would wait.
There's no fun in Baton Rouge anymore, man.
No.
I gotta tell you.
Well, but what was interesting too, and I there was no streaming. Obviously, there was no even video stores were really pretty thin in terms of what you could get, and there were plenty of movies that you would read about that only like you would see. Like I couldn't see a bunch of those movies. It would only be screening in New York and Los Angeles and maybe Chicago, and like that was like a real thing. Now, so there was a sort of an exclusivity model to it, right? That I really want to see this art house film. And we even had that phrase, the art house film.
Like the Varsity Theater, remember that?
Yeah, no, it's crazy. It's crazy. And so now we're just inundated, right? It's a total flood, and there's no exclusivity, and they're just not making good movies. Like, I hate to be the cranky old guy to point this out, but they're not making those things. They really are.
Yeah, my wife and I can't tell you the last time we went to see an adult movie. I mean, by adult movie, I mean something for grown-ups.
Yeah.
Because now it's just, superheroes.
It is, and look, and to be fair, I in part because of the pandemic, I did a deep dive with all of the Marvel movies with my kids, and they're fun. I mean, they're impressive. They're impressive technical feats, and even at times have a decent storyline here or there. But at the end of the day, they're not serious, right?
Yeah, So I mean, that's the funny thing is, I bet most people can't even tell you what won Best Picture, but everybody knows about Will Smith and Chris Rock. So, but and I think that it's actually worth thinking about the whole honor culture. I mean, somebody on my blog said, "Well, the South has the most violent murder rate in the country. Is this something to be emulated?" Well,
obviously not. Obviously not, but. There is something about a code, and look, one of the things that I know you and I are fighting, internally about, where do we think about all these things is sort of, one of the things that waters down, maybe that's the phrase we can use, or de-emphasizes honor, is in part sort of the liquid modernity that you talk about quite a bit. This idea that perhaps a best response is not to hit somebody across the face, but to sort of work it out, talk it through, agree to disagree, all those kinds of things. Yet, Rod, I got to call you out a little bit here, but this weekend, in what I consider a kind of classic Rod Dreher post, that was in
freaking
theory,
out at length at 6,000 words.
I wouldn't say that, Rod. No, but you had this I would say a classic post on Ketanji Brown, the Supreme Court nominee, who probably by this point has been confirmed. But you were really kind of wondering out loud, and I think that's what you're using. Your best blogging is when you are wondering out loud, working through things. And what are the stakes now that we can't even say? For instance, in her case, unless you're a biologist, you can't say or provide a simple definition of a woman. That is liberalism. This sort of classic liberalism that you and I have grown up with, even conservatives like us have sort of grown up in this liberal détente, this sort of liberal regime. And man, it doesn't seem like it's holding.
Okay, let's back up a little bit and remind people we're talking about. What set me off was Ketanji Brown Jackson's inability or refusal to answer Marsha Blackburn's question, what is a woman? Now, of course, it was a gotcha question, but it's not just a gotcha question, because this is massively important. we're living in a culture in which the definition of something as basic as what it means to be female and male is being radically redefined very rapidly and militantly, such that if you don't agree with the new definition, you're punished, depending on your social situation or your workplace. And the Supreme Court is going to be facing issues, cases that will decide on transgender rights and having to do with various aspects of gender ideology. Personally, I do not want any justice. I don't care their sex, their gender, their race, anything. I don't want them up there if they can't say what a woman is and use the traditional definition. And Ketanji Brown Jackson just whiffed it. She said, well, I'm not a biologist. Really? Well, it's the classic line. It's like, I'm not a veterinarian, but I know what a dog is.
Yeah.
I think that's actually true. And what set me off too is the idea that, the future of the immediate future of our civilization depends on the Supreme Court deciding questions like this. We are facing an extremely contentious culture war. We're in the middle of an extremely contentious culture war. And if the Supreme Court rules on the side of the redefiners, as it will, and it may, even if we don't get liberal justices, because like, what's the guy's name? I'm forgetting the tall, Gorsuch, let down the social conservatives and the Bostock ruling, which was a strong ruling for transgender rights in the workplace. Anyway, we need to know this. We need to deal with this. And, some people have said in defense of Ketanji Brown Jackson, said, well, she's a judge and she has to look at these as a judge does, these individual facts, and she didn't want to comment on a future case. You know what? Sorry, not good enough. If we were in a time of slavery and the question was put to a Supreme Court nominee, what is a human being? You better believe that I would not want on the court somebody who didn't believe that Black men and women were human beings. I think this is the same thing, Kale, because if we can't say what a woman and a man is, it's a very slippery slope to not being able to say what a human being is. And as we move down this technological slippery slope to transhumanism, this is a thing.
Well, I sort of wonder where are the feminists in this? And I don't ask that in a trolly sort of way, but I mean, I really mean that. If you have staked, your work on the cause, so to speak, why are they not speaking up here? You see some of it in England, with the whole TERF, the Turk Wars,
trans-exclusive radical feminists,
right? In their discourse, their feminists seem to be have a little bit more throatiness to them. They're not letting it go. They really are. And of course, one of the great champions of this is J.K. Rowling, but she's catches all kinds of heat for this, as you know. But where are the American feminists? Or is this a sort of a wink and a nod that there's the sort of the larger cause and her alleged inability to answer the question is really an unwillingness to give any red meat?
Well, this guy who comments on my blog, Jonah R. is the name he comments under. He lives in suburban Maryland. When he found out that Ketanji Brown Jackson is on the board of Georgetown Day School, he said that is the wokest place. It is where, upper middle class Washingtonians send their kids to learn how to be bourgeois social climbers. Yeah. He said that, and he went on to say, and I think this is true, that Ketanji Brown Jackson is simply a perfect creature of her social class. Harvard Law and all that. I mean, I'm sure she's quite good at being a judge.
Yeah, she's an avatar. I mean, in other words, she's perfect.
Right. But that school this is the ruling class, and they've decided that her saying that She didn't know what critical race theory was. It wasn't going to affect her. Whereas 2 years earlier, she gave a speech saying that Derek Bell, the founder of critical race theory, was foundational to her legal vision.
It just simply beggars belief. There's just no way.
I mean,
even if I'm pro critical race theory, if I'm a big, Derek Bell fan and Kimberly Crenshaw and the whole gang, there's just simply no way that she is ignorant of critical race theory. It is the lens through which our legal ruling class sees the world. It's the people, like the Federalist Society judges, those are the outliers. I mean, that's the great coup of the Republican Party of our lifetime that's actually one thing they basically sort of kind of did, which was focus on the Supreme Court. Now,
well, I think, can I just go back to your question? Mm-hmm. I think that what we're seeing with a lot of American feminists, at least, or the non-TERF feminists, at least, is the same sort of thing they did when Bill Clinton did what he did to Monica Lewinsky. They made a political decision that they didn't want to let down the progressive side, because it was more important to them to maintain, to not to uphold their principles, but to maintain progressive solidarity. I think that we could see the right do something like this if and this is just a hypothetical, pro-family conservatives who would not stand in the way of some free market legislation,
right?
Even though this hypothetical legislation could stand to hurt the family, they don't want to go against the broader free market right. I have nothing in mind there, but I'm just thinking that's the sort of thing.
So it's a kind of a coalition thing. It's sort of and maybe so it's a pragmatic move on their part that that they'll sort of roll with this. And to be fair to Judge Brown, it's probably not something that, she's probably not as animated by that particular element of the intersectional coalition than other things. I don't know. But I think your point in the blog is that, you sort of stepping back here for a bit, what does it mean when even one of the most fundamental of all things, sexual dimorphism is not allowable in meaningful legal or cultural discourse. I mean, I think that is
up for question. That is a huge freaking deal. Yeah. And this is what got to me. I was I went to NatCon in Brussels. I spoke there, but I'd gone to Amsterdam earlier to visit friends and ended up taking the train from Amsterdam down to Brussels with my friend Eva Vlaardingerbroek, who's a young Dutch activist, 25 years old, made her name over here on this side by standing up at this side of the pond, by speaking out against COVID mandates. But we were taking the train down, and she was planning to speak also at NatCon, and she was telling me about her speech. And one of the things she was talking about was transhumanism and the things that are going on that front, stuff that I hadn't really followed. And she was talking about Elon Musk's Neuralink thing, where he's trying to tap into the brain, put a chip in the brain that can read brain waves. And this has the potential for helping people who are permanently disabled, for example, to help them. But it's terrifying, this merging of the human body with machines. And the more Eva told me about things that I wasn't even following, the more unsettled I got. Then I get down to NatCon.
Just why so? Just before you get to the NatCon piece, what was unsettling about this to you?
Well, just we can't follow everything, and I had no idea how far the technology had gotten, right? And but this intersected, if I can use that word, with my concerns about what it is to be a woman, because Ava said, well, look, we're beyond that now. We're already, what does it mean to be human? And I began to realize that how radical things really are and how fast they're going, and how the slippery slope is basically vertical at this point. We're in free fall. So we get down to NatCon, and I had conversations. Some of the best conversations you have are not on the stage, but in the place where you have coffee. You get to meet people. And I talked to some religious liberty lawyers who are working on religious liberty cases here in Europe. And man, I got to tell you, it's so bad over here. They were telling me about some legislation that is coming out of the European Commission, working its way through the process, that would raise hate speech to a trans-European crime. Well, what does that mean? That means that there are only a few crimes, like serious ones, terrorism, mafia activity, human trafficking, that are crimes across all member states of the European Union, the same crime. Well, now they want to make hate speech and hate crimes that, which would get, if it passes, if it gets into law, it would give, say, progressive activists in Spain the right to file hate crimes charges against someone living in Hungary or Poland, also EU member countries, like a pastor.
Really?
And yeah, and hate crimes, hate speech laws are already taking in homosexuality.
Wait. I'm sorry. I have a question. How can somebody in Spain have standing in Poland? Right? I mean, in other words, like I can't, let's say that you get into a car accident, right? And, I decide that I'm going to sue, the Honda Motors on your behalf. Like, well, I can't do that because I don't have standing. Only you, in theory, can do that. What standing does some random person in Spain have against somebody in Poland?
Well, if under these trans-European laws, and there are very few of them, you would, if you're a member state of the European Union. And so what these lawyers were explaining to me was that, again, if this thing goes through, it is going to mean that the most liberal hate speech countries that define hate speech in the broadest possible sense, they're going to have standing to apply those laws to people in countries that are more conservative, like Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Poland. And I went on afterwards and looked this up online, and it's true. I mean, they're not making this up. And it's still at the early stages, but this is how things are going over here. And this is going to end up, if it goes through, it's going to end up putting every Christian, Muslim, or Jewish cleric or believer who dares to speak out against LGBT, it's going to put them in a world of trouble. And so I heard that, and I'm hearing other things along those lines about what's going on in Europe. And then Eva speaks. She comes out she spoke before I did. And she gave this really brave speech. I mean, I've been going to the Netherlands since 1984. I love the Dutch, but they're a really liberal post-Christian country.
They're a very secular country, yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. But there's Eva, 25 years old, and she's some kind of Protestant. And she says, look, we Christians have got to stop trying to downplay our Christianity. If we believe in God and we believe that there is a moral order, then we just got to lay it all out there. The hour is late. And I thought, I'm pretty bold in what I say, but she's going to be even bolder. And then we get Alex Kaschuta. Alex is another young woman. She's a Romanian of Hungarian descent, has this great podcast. You told me you really like it.
Yeah, I've been listening to her for the last several months. And she's fascinating because she sort of comes out of the hardcore sort of new atheist movement, really.
Right. And she said on this podcast with Oren McIntyre, a podcast of hers.
It's a great one. It's a good episode. I'll put the link below right here.
Yeah, I mean, she said that, she used to be a hardcore atheist, but just the way things are starting to go in our culture, it's moved her. It's like the guy I think I mentioned on our last podcast I had dinner with here, and the Canadian who had come to a conference in Budapest, and he was telling me that he was raised left-wing atheist. Wokeness has made him a conservative, but now the anti-human, the sinister anti-human moves that are coming about very quickly is making him think there's got to be an evil intelligence behind this. I mean, it's fascinating for me to hear.
Yes, this is Aaron, right? Yeah. So Alex's show, the Subversive Podcast, and she's interesting because she's Romanian and spent a significant chunk of time in London or in England, in London, sort of cosmopolitan, big E Europe, London, right? And there was just something about it that I think just ultimately set her off. And she's come quite a way. I was listening at one point. She said, I was sort of one of my bridge figures, was somebody like Jordan Peterson. But she's, realizing, and what was her speech, really about?
Well, she was talking about how the civilization that we now have is all about breaking down family, breaking down categories of male, female, and all that, and it's tyrannical. She said that
what does it want?
Yeah, well, she began by talking about the articles, leading articles in like Cosmopolitan, and they're all about all the transgressive sex that you need to be having. And she said men's magazines are the same way. Yeah. Then she goes on to talk about how everything in this culture is about breaking all bonds that are unchosen. This is something that's not controversial to you and me, but to hear her say that, she was totally right. And she said that transgender people are the perfect specimen for this culture because they have denied even the bonds of biology. And she went on to talk about how this is ultimately tyranny. It's going towards tyranny. It is alienating us from everything. And we become putty in the hands of these rich people powerful people who run the culture. So then I get up to give my talk, and you can imagine what I said. I talked about the importance, how Europeans ought to, you've got to return to God. There is no way to save this civilization without God. And don't wait on your religious leaders to do it. I called out Cardinal Reinhard Marx, the Catholic Archbishop of Munich, who was recently photographed at a queer mass. I said, these guys are dead. They're not the future. Let the dead bury their dead. But you lay people have got to stand up and speak out and do not be afraid. But I have to say that this was all in the speech anyway, but I toughened it up after listening to Eva and Alex, two young women, young European women who really understand in a way that I think I know a lot of us Americans don't, what the stakes are. And the ultimate thing is, Kale, and you saw this on the long thing I wrote, that I began to realize, what? Liberalism is just over. Liberalism, classical liberalism, has never been able to fight this stuff, has never been able to resist this stuff. I want to live in a classical liberal state, polity. I want there to be tolerance and freedom of expression and all of these good things. But I just don't have faith in it anymore. I just think that we're in a situation of survival. Now, in a liberal state, our liberal state has gotten to the point where we can't even have a Supreme Court nominee affirm what a woman is. Yeah. I mean, if that doesn't set off alarm bells, what the hell is wrong with people?
Well, no, I think that's my question too. One of the things that I've learned from listening to Alex's framing of the situation, is that, and these are my words, not hers, is the recognition that liberalism is a religion, right? Not in the way that we have sort of traditionally understood what a religion is, but it has dogma, it has sort of thresholds of buy-in, and yet it operates under the mantle of pluralism, but it's not really true. Like it, and the reason why I asked you earlier, like, what does it want, right? What does this sort of, we're calling this sort of this proto-liberal tyranny of some sort. embodied by our ruling classes. Like, well, what does it want? It seems to want consuming units, consuming non-producing units.
Yeah, and or another way to put it, and I got into this in the podcast, in my blog post, controversially, I think there's something satanic here. I mean that literally satanic, but if you want to look at it metaphorically and
what do you mean by satanic or demonic? What are you saying?
Well, I want to be clear that I am an Orthodox Christian. I believe that Satan is a literal being, a powerful, discarnate entity that seeks death and destruction. But if you want to speak of Satan as a metaphor, all right, fine. What he's a metaphor for is the unbound will, the will that to create one's own reality and to be unbound by any laws, by any order. Before the Russian Revolution in Russia, Satan was seen as by the cultural elites as an admirable figure. They weren't Satanists, but they saw him as somebody, or as a figure, as a symbol of the free will of the fully realized individual who takes nothing, receives nothing from God or anybody else, just makes his own laws. That's where we are as a society. I mean, whether or not you believe that there is an actual being called Satan, we are in a satanic society in the sense that this is what our elites want. They want to tear down everything, every unchosen obligation, even biology. I put on my blog post, Kale, the image of the Baphomet. The Baphomet is, as far as I know, it goes back to the 19th century. It may be older than that, but the 19th century occultists used it. It is a goat human with horns, and he has breasts, but also a phallus. It's a transgendered figure, and also the pentagram on the forehead. The Church of Satan has created a statue of the Baphomet without the breast, but with little children looking up to the Baphomet for guidance. I mean, and they're trying to troll everybody. The thing is, it's not a troll. I mean, look what's happening to children in this culture when right now we're having these fights over kids being exposed to gender ideology in kindergarten, first, second grade. I mean, and what does liberalism say here? Well, we have to think about it. We have to
carve out space for them. Like, this is, there's no establishment, blah, blah, blah. Well, okay. So what, again, even for the sake of the conversation, we can at least initially start this off as a sort of a metaphor of some sort. What is the point of the metaphor? Like, what?
Metaphor of Satan?
Yeah, and Baphomet. Like, why is this? What does the metaphor want? I'm struggling with language
death.
here.
It's a culture of death. It wants to destroy the ability of people to reproduce life, stable life. There is a reason that transgenderism leads to having all these young people sterilize themselves.
Well, sterility is the point. Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Right. Because chaos and death.
Yeah, because, I think about there's nothing more foundational, of course, for the civilization that we find ourselves in and nested in than, Genesis, right? And whether you are an adherent of the Jewish tradition or the Christian tradition, we know that, male and female, he created them. God, creates the world and pronounce it as good, as in, the generation, Genesis, the generation of life is good. And his commission is to be fruitful and multiply. And in fact, as a way of looking at the God of Genesis as being positively obsessed with life, obsessed with generation, like that is the telos, right? Is that we imitate God insofar as we participate in and bring about procreation. And even in Genesis, sorry, one last thing, even in Genesis, that Eve is the product of the collaboration between God, the creator God, and Adam as an expression of want and communion, right? So that even in all this, like our job, our task in this life seems to be, as suggested in the book of Genesis, is to be fruitful and multiply. Now, we can do that literally, and that's certainly the primary way, but we can also do this metaphorically, like bringing about things which bring about life. And what strikes me with all of this Baphomet business and the transgender business is that this is the perfect way, and I think Alex Kaschuta gets into this a little bit too, is that this is the perfect way in which to do what the demon wants, right? What the demon wants is child sacrifice. What the demon wants is an extinction of life.
Yep.
And so here we are.
Yeah, and you'll remember this amazing podcast we did with Helena, the detransitioner, 2 or 3 episodes ago. Mm-hmm. And she's not a religious person, but you and I both talked about later about how listening to her talk about this, there's something deeply sinister and spiritual going on in this whole thing. And this idea that you must, as she described the whole process of being seduced into the trans world, it wasn't because she was trans. It was because she was so lonely. She was felt uncomfortable in her body, and she found community on this online, the Tumblr world. But remember how she talked about being hit with just this flood of information that you must this, you must, where she felt like she couldn't even think for herself anymore.
Well, and that's the spirit. That's the spirit of the religion making demands, right? It seems that's what it's about, and it co-ops a desire for teleology. I mean, it co-ops all these things. It gives you a destiny. Now, you and I would say that it's an anti-destiny, right? That it's an imitation, a counterfeit. For a destination, because it's a destination that ends in extinction, not eternal life.
Right. And look, even just to take religion out of it, what is the most fundamental purpose of any society is to produce the next generation.
That's right.
Well, we're losing that. We're losing and we have lost, I think, the sense that is the purpose of life and how to do that. I mean, it's incredible how we've gone from our parents' generation where it was just assumed, of course you're going to have kids. I mean, not everybody is able to have them, but it's just what you do.
A vast majority. This is just, it's the default setting.
Yeah. Well, now we're at a place where even ordinary kids are terrified to start families. They don't know how to find each other, know how to do courtship. And there are complicated reasons here. A lot of it's to do with technology, but this ideology, this gender ideology, is a big part of it.
Well, it's the ascension of the self. I mean, I think this takes up a lot of the things that Carl Trueman, lays out so magnificently in his book. That this is the logic of the wanting, desiring self. It's independent of community, independent of context, independent of purpose, right? So that the purpose is sort of auto fixated. It's a sort of a strange autoeroticism, right? To the sort of the ascendant wanting self. It's a dead end.
Yeah, I just last night here in Budapest, I'm trying to finish Iain McGilchrist's new book, The Matter with Things. It's like over 1,000 pages. It's pretty dense, but last night it just blew me away, the stuff I was reading. Again, he's not a religious man, but he's going through recent findings in physics and talking about how purpose is everywhere in the universe, everywhere. And he talks about how that only among biologists is there this absolute dogmatic denial of the evidence in front of their eyes of purpose. And McGilchrist says that this is because they don't want to believe in God. And McGilchrist doesn't believe in God, but he's like, there is some purpose there. Just because there's purpose, it doesn't mean that God definitely exists. But, come on, look at the evidence. I didn't know about this evidence. I mean, but it's findings in physics.
It's so interesting. But even in the biological world, I remember last spring we had a pretty rough winter. The prior one, this one's been okay. And I just remember, when spring hits, especially up here in New England, you can really kind of see the stark distinctions, between the seasons. And at a certain point in spring, there's this almost just this super abundance of nature, like sort of bursting forth with seeds and shoots and you just think about like one tree will drop hundreds of thousands of acorns, and with the whole point is that it's literally, it's future oriented, and it's like the tree is sending itself out into the future. Now I know I'm anthropomorphizing things on some level, and one must be cautious about it, but the evidence is clear that life wants to beget life. Right. Only we sort of pretend like, well, I'm just, we're just not going to do this thing. Like, really? Like, then you're doing something really weird.
We are. And McGilchrist talks about in his book, and again, I want to emphasize that this is not a religious book, but I keep wondering, what's it going to take, Iain, to make you follow everything to the logical conclusion? But, he talks about how there's purpose and design so obviously built into matter. And the reason that, he says, and I think he's right, that biologists won't accept that is because we in the contemporary West do not want to accept that there is anything above our sovereign will. Right. And if we're going to if we can even, we will rewrite the laws of nature, or try to, because you can't really do that, but we can try to, for the sake of asserting our will. But now it's gotten to this truly satanic point. I mentioned on here before, Kale, that 2 or 3 years ago, we had a guy come to our little parish, Orthodox parish in Baton Rouge, who had gotten out of a cult of the cult of Aleister Crowley, the Ordo OTO, and they follow the writings of Crowley. Right. And it's sex magic. And it's what they basically want to do is to gain power by having transgressive sex, and the more transgressive, the better. I mean, they do some really sick stuff. And the reason the guy and Crowley is satanic in the sense that he believes that having transgressive sex, including sex with children, is the ultimate source of power, the ultimate defiance of God. And this young man got out of it because he said, I was sexually abused as a kid, and I could see where this was going. I was going to have to do some things that I could not bear to do. And so he left. And what's so interesting about it, I remember we had a conversation after church one day. He said that, if you read Crowley's stuff from the 20s and the 30s, the sort of world he foresaw as being his utopia, a place where people are free to do whatever kind of sex they want, where God does not exist, where the individual has been free to follow his or her desires as far as they take them. That's pretty much what we have today.
Yeah, it strikes me it's exactly right. It's like, what, if I were a minion of Satan, like, I'm not really sure how much I would do differently at this point to bring about my goals. If my goals are extinction, right? I'm not sure what I would do differently. And it strikes me, even as you're talking right now, that this goal, again, and in the context of our conversation with Helena, what they never seem to really answer is the sort of the sustainability question. Like, let's just say that this is the foundation upon which you're trying to like build a life. Like, how is it sustainable beyond you? And again, I don't expect someone deep in the throes of the ideology to understand this, but like, just as we sort of look at this from the outside in, it's not life sustaining, right? I mean, our metaphors break down because our language actually holds the meaning.
Yeah, and only thing they can say is freedom. We need more and more freedom for the exercise of the will. Well, freedom for what? For what? This is not working. This is leading to death. And I think the thing, Kale, that go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying, where the only thing that can kind of speak with any kind of oomph behind this, it would seem, would be a healthy church.
Religion, exactly. And this is the point, that you can say within liberalism, well, all right, make the argument that this doesn't work and that we need to turn around. I don't think, I've lost my ability to believe that argument is working anymore, because our desires, our passions are so intense. I mean, this is the reason why the Orthodox Church says that the base of the most basic sins are sins of appetite. Yeah. I think in Dante, the sins of the intellect are greater, but the Orthodox have a different view, because they believe that the sins of appetite determine what we pay attention to and determine, therefore, what we desire.
Sure.
Sins of appetite are sins of desire.
And therefore what we bring into the world. Yeah, I'm with you.
And I was thinking this weekend on my way back from Brussels about the book Submission, Michel Houellebecq's novel, which is, we're still talking about it 7 years later. It's the one set in a future France where the protagonist is just this clapped out professor. He doesn't believe in anything. He just has sex and drinks and teaches, doesn't even believe in literature anymore. But he's trying to figure out, what do I do? What do I do with this? And what ends up happening is only religion can hold French society together, because French republicanism has just descended into animal sex and shopping, and the French end up turning to Islam because maybe that's a solution. There's this great poem by Cavafy, Cavafy, called "Waiting for the Barbarians." It's set in like some kind of future world or some fantasy world where all the people, the rich people of a decadent city are waiting. They get news that the barbarians are on their way. I actually want to go out and welcome them and welcome their domination, because those people, says Cavafy, those people seem like a kind of solution. And I think we will get to a point where we, in our decadent liberalism, we either return to God or we'll welcome some future Stalin.
So I just happen to have this at my hand, and I think it speaks to this sort of exhaustion of our moment, sort of the death-oriented moment we are living in. And I'm going to read it. It's from Lewis Mumford's The City and History, and he's talking about the end of Rome. And so here, I'm just going to read it, and you can riff on it, because I think it picks up exactly this. From the standpoint of both politics and urbanism, Rome remains a significant lesson of what to avoid. Its history presents a series of classic danger signals to warn one when life is moving in the wrong direction. Wherever crowds gather in suffocating numbers, wherever rents rise steeply and housing conditions deteriorate, wherever a one-sided exploitation of distant territories removes the pressure to achieve balance and harmony nearer at hand, there the precedents of Roman building almost automatically revive, as they have come back today: the arena, the tall tenement, the mass contests and exhibitions, the football matches, the international beauty contests, the striptease made ubiquitous by advertisement, the constant titillation of the senses by sex, liquor, and violence, all in true Roman style. So too, the multiplication of bathrooms and the over-expenditure on the broadly paved motor roads, and above all, the massive collective concentration on glib ephemeralities of all kinds, performed with supreme technical audacity. These are symptoms of the end, magnifications of demoralized power, minifications of life. When these signs multiply, Necropolis is near, though not a stone yet has crumbled, for the barbarian has already captured the city from within. Come, hangman, come, vulture.
Oh my gosh, man, I think I'm going to log off and go crawl under the bed now. Okay.
No, but I mean, but this is right.
We have to hear this. We have to hear these prophetic voices. And this is the thing I took away from there. It's like we are crumbling from within. We have been captured from within, and we are not in normal times. I heard from a lawyer friend over the weekend back in the U.S. who said that, he was at a conference talking to some lawyers who fight on religious liberty fronts, and they told him and said, "We're at war. This is war." And who are our generals? Where are our generals? One of the things I talked about, Kale, at this conference, and I mentioned this earlier, is telling the people in the audience, if you're a Christian, do not wait for your bishops, for your priests, for your pastors, for your religious teachers to take the lead here. You have got to do it yourself, because they're corrupt. Not every single one, but many of them are. And, you and I were talking before we went on the air about this piece that appeared in Premier Christianity, an English Christian magazine, by a woman writing under a pseudonym, Mary Wren. She says she used to be a Catholic, and now she's an Anglican, and her husband is training to be a vicar. But she misses the Catholic Church because at least the Catholic Church taught things as opposed to the Anglican Church.
Don't we all miss the Catholic Church? Don't we all?
Sorry, I'm reading that thinking, sister, I don't know where you were as a Catholic, but I think that, she's speaking about the Anglican. She's urging the bishops to stand up and teach for God's sake, and
be a moral prophet. Be a moral prophet is I think what she's calling for. Why are you not giving us? Why are you not teaching us, informing us, and standing up for us? We're all alone. I mean, I think that's really the takeaway from her piece, right? Absolutely. Is that we're alone in standing up, for the faith, standing up for the forces of life. I mean, all of these things.
And I think that when I read that, I'm like, man, most churches are like that. The Catholic churches, I don't know what Catholic church she's thinking about, but 13 years as a Catholic, to have it written down on paper, these strong teachings, is one thing, but you rarely hear it at Mass. In fact, you may hear the opposite. You have Cardinal Marx going to the queer Mass.
And remember, Karl Marx is no, a backbencher. I mean,
he's Karl Marx.
Did I say Karl Marx? My apologies.
No, Freudian.
Yes. Cardinal Marx. I forgot his first name. But, he's no backbencher. He's no some obscure dude who from some random, small micro diocese out in, the hinterlands. I mean, he's like one of the main guys. He's one of Francis's guys.
Yeah.
And here he is. He's standing up at, an affirming Mass or something like this,
You're celebrating 20 years of ministry to LGBTs. And he wants to have, he says he wants to have an affirming church. I put on my blog a memorandum that is supposedly going around the Vatican. Sandro Magister, who is one of the leading Vatican reporters, put it on his own blog in English translation. It's said to be, it's anonymous. It said the author may or may not be a cardinal, but it's taking the measure of this pontificate. He calls Francis's pontificate a disaster, and talks about what the next conclave needs to do, what it needs to be looking for in the next pope. Did you have any thoughts on that as a Catholic?
Loads of thoughts I have as a person. I did like the one line here. It says, commentators of every school, if for different reasons, with the possible exception of Father Spadaro, S.J., agree that this pontificate is a disaster in many or most respects, a catastrophe. God, we could do a whole thing just on Spadaro himself, which, if memory serves, I believe that Father Spadaro is no fan of Rod Dreher.
No,
is that accurate?
Yeah, he's the head of Civiltà Cattolica, the authoritative Jesuit magazine, very close to Francis, and is part of Francis's communications team. And no, he's been a real enemy of mine, made himself an enemy of mine. But be that as it may.
But whatever. Yeah, my point is that very few people, see this pontificate. It's so funny. So even that line, right? I mean, there are going to be plenty of people who might get angry with me, but it's remarkable that some people would look at the current pontificate as like a good thing, and you can even, in other words, and the reason why I say this is because of confusion. I mean, I think that's really what this comes down to, that there's this sort of almost a studied perfection of confusion, that has come out of all of this. But and look, some of the stuff on the memo sounds fine enough to me, that there needs to be elimination of confusion, and there have been some missteps and blah, blah, blah. And this is what needs to happen at the next conclave. And, the last one here, and this is the one I think I want to focus on. This is on your blog. It says, oh gosh, what did it say? It was something about JP2, it was something about, this
John Paul II.
Yeah, John Paul II and the Christocentrism of John Paul II, and this needs to be sort of, reasserted. And yeah, fine, I don't disagree. The Catholic Church should be Christocentric. Full stop. Like that's not. How is that in any way, shape, or form a controversial statement? In fact, that's my appreciation of the Second Vatican Council is that it was precisely an attempt to make the church more Christocentric. So in that sense, I'm very, very pro. But I think I'm trying to look at this as just the phenomena of the situation. And I'm reminded of what has happened to a totally unrelated institution. So one of the most disturbing things that I've seen politically in the last, in my lifetime is what has happened to our respective branches of government. And just bear with me here a second. I'm going to make a point to bring it back to the church. But right, the goal, the point of the judiciary is to judge laws. The point of the legislative branch is to make laws, and the point of the executive branch is to execute laws, right? So it's a very, I know this is like earth-shattering stuff that you're hearing on the General Collective podcast, but that has been very much confused in our lifetime. So that really the legislative branch has outsourced its legislation to the judiciary, and the executive branch has also sort of taken over its sort of role. And anyway, my point is, President Obama at one point says, Congress, if you don't give me what I want, I've got a phone and I've got a pen, right? And there's this sort of this taking over, like I can just legislate by fiat. And so we see this, like he did it, and then Trump comes in and Trump uses the telephone and the pen and just does all these executive orders. And then Biden comes in and he just does whatever he wants to do. So there's no kind of stability, and there's no kind of sense. And so I want to use that as an analogy to look at not only this vicar-to-be, this wife of the vicar-to-be's letter, and the situation with the pontificate. You yourself have said many times that when you were a Catholic, one of the things you could always sort of point to is the sort of the on paper reality. And when you were Catholic, you had the added benefit of a pope, both times, I think, in both of the popes that while you were still Catholic, were Orthodox, right? They were believers, I think is the way that you and I would call it. And I'll leave the Francis thing alone for the time being. I don't want to get into that morass. But the point is that, yeah, you might go to the local franchise down the block in your suburban church, and you might hear, Father Pete say something, namby-pamby, or at the very least, it was probably just banal, right? It was certainly nothing impressive. But you could always say, look, the documents are sound, the Pope is sound, he's the bulwark for my belief, da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, what has been proven in the last decade, of course, is that that's not a bulwark, really. And so what's going to happen, my fear is what's going to happen. Let's just say that this memo that has gone out, that we need to sort of reassert this and reassert that, fine, all well and good. But guess what? The cat's out of the bag. the authority now you know that if you are a heterodox person, all you have to do is just simply wait for the next pontificate. Wait for the next pope. He might be friendly to your cause. And so therefore, any moral authority that the church has remaining is just merely political now. Yeah, it's not real. It's not the sacred order. It's just, whatever can be sort of cobbled together in some pretty buildings in the middle of a European country in the southern part of the continent. That's all it is. It just becomes yet another captured political institution. And I don't know how that's sustainable. I really don't.
No. What? I have to go. I have a meeting, but no, I mean, I hate to leave on that cliffhanger, but I think that I got an email from a young Catholic I met in Brussels. He's studying at the Catholic University of Leuven nearby, which is nominally Catholic. And he told me, he said, you know what, your Benedict option book has really meant a lot to me, because I came to faith, when I was working as like some stockbroker or something, and it has really helped me understand better the situation that I find myself in as a Catholic, and that all of us Christians find ourselves in, and to realize that we're going to have to find a way through this ourselves. And that is the thing that most people don't want to hear. I don't want to hear it, but it's true, and I don't want to hear it because I want this stuff. I want somebody else to do the thinking for me, like Mary Wren, and it's nothing wrong with somebody like Mary Wren wanting the people whose job it is to teach, to govern, and to preach, to do that.
But you're talking about captured leadership of these various institutions. And what I want to emphasize here is I'm not just cracking on my own church. I think you can see the same thing in evangelical circles. You can see the same thing, I know for a fact, in Orthodox circles. There are certain built-in anti-fragilities, perhaps, that render this a little bit more sustainable in the short term. But that the elites in your own confession would come after you in a heartbeat. The elites of my own confession are going to come after me, guns a-blazing, because they own all the institutions, and people like me and you are not welcome ultimately.
Yeah, well, I as I told the audience there in Brussels, I said cultural Christianity ain't going to cut it. No. There's no substitute for radical personal conversion and building out from your own conversion, and building up small communities. I mean, look, this is what, if you go back to Dante, when Dante, the pilgrim Dante, is on the terrace of anger in the Purgatorio. Right. And he asked this man, Marco, the Lombard, he said, look, I come from this world where everything is falling apart. Everybody is at each other's throats. What should we do? And Marco says, you've got to use your free will to resist vice and to convert your own heart and build outward from that for the renewal of society. There's no other way. Yeah. And I think there's hope in that. There's hope in reality, but we have got to understand when you have a woman up for the Supreme Court and she, for whatever reason, whether it's a lack of conviction or it's a strategic, when she can't say what a woman is, that is a red sign. That is a canary in the coal mine that we have lost it.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right, because either of the interpretations are frankly scary. Either she can't because she literally can't, or she won't because she recognizes there's some other game being played. We're in a bad spot there. So anyway, all right, well, look, Rod, I know you got to go in a meeting. I've got to go teach class because it's a lovely spring day here in New England. So until then.
Don't get nothing on you.